Great to see you all here and to welcome you on behalf of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation to this special event, the 16th Annual Kelly Lecture. This lecture series was established to honor Frank K. Kelly and his uplifting vision of the human condition. Frank both endowed the series and delivered the first Kelly Lecture in 2002. In the language used by the Foundation to describe this series, each lecture is presented by a distinguished individual to explore humanity's present circumstances and ways by which we can shape a more promising future of our planet and of its inhabitants. This series has overfulfilled this lofty promise. Such recent lecturers as Robert Scheer, Helen Caldicott, Noam Chomsky, Dennis Kucinich, and Daniel Ellsberg are precisely the kinds of minds and lives that Frank Kelly had hoped would be chosen. And I have abundant confidence that Frank would be thrilled by the prospect of the 2017 Kelly Lecture. And we are more than confident that this year's lecture will maintain, if not exceed, this proud tradition. For the first time, the lecture platform will be shared by two honorees instead of one. This allows for a public continuation of their inspired collaboration in the 2012 production of the 10-part documentary series airing on Showtime TV channel and supplemented by the publication of a book with parallel themes that's entitled Untold History of the United States. The TV series and the book are precious contributions to our national political consciousness, and never more relevant and instructive than at the present time. It gives me particular pleasure to introduce Peter Kuznick. Peter was a participant in a recent, quite extraordinary two-day symposium organized by the Foundation here in Santa Barbara around the theme of the fierce urgency of nuclear zero. Of course, I am not so foolish as to attempt an introduction of Oliver Stone. It would be an insult to the audience and take away from his time with you. Presentations will be conducted in a conversational format, engaging our two Kelly lecturers and moderated by Rick Wayman, Director of Programs and Operations at the Nuclear Age Foundation. Let us welcome our two speakers for the evening.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rick Wayman. I'm the Director of Programs at the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation. We're just going to give Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick a minute to walk back and join us on stage. They were out there watching this film with all of us tonight, and I think that really gives you a sense of how proud they are of this work. They spent years of their life working on it, yet they still want to be here to take it in. So I just want to mention a few things before they join us. The title of tonight's event is Untold History, Uncertain Future. And I think that we're facing a very uncertain future at the moment. If you are a news junkie like me, you would have seen what President Trump said today about nuclear weapons, his first comments on nuclear weapons since taking office. He said, if countries are going to have nuclear weapons, we are going to be at the top of the pack. So this is, we saw this history that happened over 50 years ago in the Cuban Missile Crisis. There are still far too many nuclear weapons in the world. That's just one of the things we're going to talk about tonight. So let's welcome to the stage Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick. Thanks. right in the middle. Thank you both so much for being here and for allowing us to see just a short part of this epic documentary series that you've made.
That was an abrupt ending, Rick. It was too abrupt. It was a beautiful moment after that. I wish you had said it.
The next 1 minute after that is the emotional high point of the whole episode. So you've got to, there's only about 1.5 minutes left, but it's incredibly powerful.
Okay,
so
everyone, when you go home tonight, it's on Netflix. This is episode 6.
Episode 6.
My deepest apologies. If you need my Netflix password, find me afterwards. I'll get it to you. Let's get right into some nuclear weapons issues. 4 weeks ago, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists moved their doomsday clock to 2.5 minutes to midnight. This is the closest it's been since 1953. You're both students of history, teachers of history. Is this really happening right now?
It's hard to believe that it's really happening. It's hard to believe that Donald Trump is president of the United States. You know, and we all pinch ourselves. We keep on hoping we're going to wake up and realize this is all a terrible dream. But the reality is that somehow it happened, and we can talk about why it happened. But the good thing about Trump's presidency is that more people are mobilized now than at any time since the 1960s. Trump has done more to bring back a sense of activism than anything we could have done on our own. And there's a very healthy aspect to that, of course, in that when we're dealing with nuclear issues, Trump is really frightening. Not only the comments he made today, but his comments all along. When he says, what's the point of having nuclear weapons if you can't use them? You know, most of us would say, you're right. Yeah, that's the point of having nuclear weapons, get rid of them. Trump says, let's use them. I mean, it's that kind of, he's so rash, impulsive, reckless, that we don't want his tiny fingers anywhere near the proverbial nuclear button. When Hillary Clinton says that a man who can get provoked by a tweet should not have access to nuclear codes, she was right. And he talks about, he says it's okay if Japan and South Korea and Saudi Arabia get nuclear weapons. He says if ISIS attacked us, of course we'd hit them with a nuclear weapon. He said the first thing he wants to do is tear up the nuclear treaty with Iran. I mean, you look across the board. I remember when Bobby Knight, the basketball coach from Indiana University, introduced Trump and endorsed him. And he said, the reason why we need Trump is because he reminds me of another president, Harry Truman. And Truman had the courage to use nuclear weapons in World War II, and Trump will do the same. And then Trump says, wow, isn't that fabulous? What a great guy Bobby Knight is. You know, and there, you know, so the danger is that Trump, you know, we've had two presidents whose names start with TRUM. And you know, one already used nuclear weapons, and I fear that the second would, if given the opportunity. So we have to not only get rid of him, but get rid of him quickly.
So episode 3 of the documentary is about the bomb, focusing obviously on Truman. And Truman said something very similar that you played in that episode about why would we bother having these weapons if we weren't going to use them. And that was obviously a much different time in history than we're living in right now, but another similarity.
No, he spoke it to Murrow Ed Murrow on the program after he had left office. It was about the H-bomb. And he said it in a philosophical way, but it was kind of stupid what he said, and Murrow kind of highlighted that. It still sticks out, but different context. I think, Peter is very passionate about it, and I understand, but I do think you have to take into account realities of being in office and what you say on the campaign trail. And I think Trump does speak still like a candidate, and what he says can be really silly. What he gets through this process of Washington and the levelization of it, it's a little bit different. He's also I'm optimistic in the sense that he has, first of all, he's a businessman, and businessmen don't like war, and he came out against Iraq when it was going on, and he was on the campaign trail. He never gave it up. He kept to that theme. Although Hillary Clinton was pounding him on the Russians, he's the only one who said, well, I can get along with the Russians. What's wrong with being into an alliance, which is what the alliance idea goes back to, of course, Roosevelt, Wallace, Kennedy, an alliance with Russia. And I think this is the most optimistic thing I heard. And of course, he's taken an enormous amount of heat from it, from liberals. And of course, if you see the whole series, you understand how ironic this is, that the so-called liberal elite is attacking the shit out of him with ridiculous articles and ridiculous accusations. And this comes from the New York Times, Post, CNN, all of MSNBC, whatever you want to call it. This is our mainstream media has turned up the flame on Russia. So they are the stupid ones in this case, and the exaggerating ones. They are doing great damage to the body of this country. And they are, in their own way, scaring people far more about Russia than is necessary, because if you go into the facts over a period of time, you're going to find that it's a completely different story.
So Oliver, just to follow up on that, notwithstanding the media and the other pressures that are coming to bear on possible positive relations between the U.S. and Russia, do you think it can happen? Do you think in the next few years we can improve relations with Russia? Together, the U.S. and Russia have 93% of the 15,000 nuclear weapons in the world.
That's
it is very important.
It's crucial. I wish he would see the series, because we're repeating the same mistake. We have mad generals in the White House, mad generals. I mean, what Kennedy was up against was amazing to me. And it's a great story. It's a great story. That 13 days comes closest to dramatizing it. But Kennedy had tremendous guts, and we talk about it in the series. It wasn't quoted tonight, but we talk about a man's courage. And the fact that he was sick a lot of his life and knew pain, there was a similarity to Roosevelt. And I think sometimes when you have that kind of pain, you have a certain compassion and an understanding of humanity that seems to be lacking in the thinking about Russia. And this is what's depressing about this time, because we're repeating the same mistakes. We're completely making their power far greater. We're calling it Russian aggression. Examine all the evidence. Listen to the other side. There is no other side to listen to except in the alternate media. You can't get this. So it's really important, I think, for us to do another series, but we're out of time and luck and probably money. But this is such a mistake that we're making. And again, mainstream media has tremendous effect on the way that people think. I've run into so many liberals who are saying Russia, 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 like it's breathing down our neck. It's the same mentality I felt as a young man. My father was Republican and he was conservative. I grew up in the 1950s thinking they're in our schools, they're in our government. There's no way to stop them. They're under the bed practically. I grew up hating them, and I didn't know who they were until I started to grow up and have life experiences and go to Russia and talk to people. And it's pretty depressing when you get paranoia to this degree. And,
yeah. Thank you, Oliver. Please follow on.
I mean, I agree with Oliver completely on this, that the one thing that I liked about Trump during the campaign was that he was making sense about diffusing the tension with Russia. Because many of us were saying that the situation we were in at the end of 2016 was the closest we've been to war with Russia since the Cuban Missile Crisis that we were talking about here. You had the situation in Ukraine. You had the situation in Syria. You had the rearmament, the U.S. sending more troops, and other countries sending more troops to the Baltic states. We had the missile defense going up in Romania and Poland. Hillary Clinton, who I was supporting, of course, during the campaign, Hillary Clinton said that she wants to establish a no-fly zone over Syria. General Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said if we set up a no-fly zone over Syria, that was going to lead to war with Russia. And so the situation was very dangerous. We were hoping that Trump could at least do something positive in diffusing that tension. But now he's been boxed in so effectively that for him to take any initiative to calm that situation would probably be beyond his capability. And so I think that's very unfortunate. And Alvar, I agree that it's a very dangerous situation that we shouldn't underestimate.
Great, thank you. So, what sort of leadership does the world need? Whether it is going to come from the Trump administration now, a possible future administration 4 years from now, or who knows when? But what needs to happen? Because the world can't the world can't go on like this.
Well,
can it?
but sometimes it does.
Indefinitely.
We hope. You know, in my darkest days, you just, what do you do exactly? You see, the problem is the media, and that's very important here in America, major media. And of course, both houses of Congress, it seems, the NATO countries, the generals, the guy who leads them, Stoltenberg. I mean, now, of course, you have the intelligence community, which is amazing because they know better. Some of them know better. I mean, if the NSA is doing its job, it's unbelievable that they have. Well, they said they had moderate confidence that the Russians had hacked the election, which is very scary to Americans. But it's far from that, and it didn't happen that way. But they never signed on, completed the report. But the fact that they gave some kind of a limited acceptance to it indicates how stupid they are, as Ray McGovern and many people we know in that community who are retired or veterans for sanity have said, this was not a hack, this was a leak. But let's not, you don't have to go into all the details of that. Where was the evidence in that report? There was no evidence. It was all assessments. And this, in the old days, Kennedy at least had the guts to declassify information for the public and show what the Russians were doing when they were approaching Cuba. He actually released it. So did Reagan, by the way. As bad as he was, he released and declassified information about Beirut, about the bombing there, he accusing the Iranians. Of course, he didn't ever say what the prelude to that was. But forget about that. At least they declassified something real. This is not real. There's been only assessments, no evidence presented. And we accept it. Very intelligent people accept it. This is stunning to me. So in other words, everything's fallen apart. The intelligence, the Congress, so to speak, the newspaper, the magazine, the television aspect of it. These are very dangerous coming together, and the NATO people. So I'm really, what happens? On that worst day, it all comes to be. You push Russia too far, they're already showing massive patience. I credit to Putin and his entire group of people around him. And he, of course, will come under pressure from his hardliners, as you know. And one mistake, and it's going to be over. Because, for example, we tried to send a destroyer into the Black Sea during the Crimean referendum as a statement of power. And of course, the Russians regard Crimea in a completely different way than the American media do. I mean, Crimea, we can argue that later, but the point was that the Russians activated their missiles. They have a very strong new missile. And it was clear to the commander of the Donald Cook, it was a destroyer, right into the Black Sea. And if he'd kept going, he was signaled that the missile was on him, and he understood that this missile was much more powerful than the Tomahawk missiles that he had. He backed away. He did a U-turn just like the Russians did in the blockade. So that's the kind of moment you want to avoid. But who knows what's going on with all these NATO exercises in the air. And some of them, by the way, they don't carry transponders. Now they're sending planes over Russia, over the borders without transponders, so they don't, in other words, in the old days when there was diplomacy, they would identify themselves. The Russians have been very patient as to where the provocations we're sending to them on the border and undersea, under the water, and every which way. So there's an accident like this we showed is possible at any moment. At any moment. They're smart. They've been there before. They've been tested before. This has happened, by the way, in Syria too. The famous 2013 incident with the Red Line business. We can go into that. You were saying something?
Yeah, well, because, Oliver, I was just going to say that is exactly why I think we can't go on like this indefinitely. Any day, whether it's tomorrow or 5 years from now or who knows when.
Well, hopefully 5 years. You have to think in daily terms because it is moving fast.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, Peter.
Rick, you asked the question of what do we need to do moving forward. And we think that you need to look backward in order to move forward, which is why we don't only talk about the bad side of what the United States has done, we look at the things the United States has done right and the leaders who actually had some vision. You know, one of the people who we highlight is Henry Wallace. And I assume that this audience knows who Henry Wallace is. But Henry Wallace was vice president of the United States from 1941 to 45, and he should have been president in 1945 instead of Harry Truman, and the American people wanted him. When Gallup released a poll asking who they wanted back on the ticket as vice president in 44, 65% of Americans said they wanted Henry Wallace, 2% said they wanted Harry Truman. Now, the difference between Henry Wallace, who was a visionary, and Harry Truman was that Wallace could see the world through the eyes of other countries. He could see how the Soviets felt in 1945 when they had lost. Let me just mention this. I did an anonymous survey of college students recently, and I asked them how many Americans died in World War II. And the median answer I got was 90,000. So they were only 300,000 off. That's in the ballpark. I asked them how many Soviets died in World War II. And the median answer I got was 100,000. So they were only 27 million off, right? Which means that college kids can't understand what World War II is about, what the Cold War was about, what's going on in Ukraine. And I try to concretize it for them. After 9/11, the United States invades Afghanistan, invades Iraq, gets involved all over the world in global war on terrorism. 27 million people was the equivalent of one 9/11 a day, every day for 24 years. And that's what the Soviets suffered. And Wallace understood that. Truman didn't understand that. So part of what we had argued is that had Wallace become president after Roosevelt instead of Truman, there would have been no atomic bombing in 1945 and probably no Cold War. So you can have leaders who can see the world through the eyes of our adversaries and think a little more globally and long range about what needs to be done. We live in a world now in which the richest 8 people have more wealth than the poorest 3.6 billion people. I mean, that's insanity. And is Trump going to solve that? Of course not. Would Clinton have solved that? No. But we need leaders who are going to be thinking in a very, very different way, and we can learn lessons from John Kennedy. The reason why we emphasize Kennedy's last year is that he changed so much from the early Cold War before the Cuban Missile Crisis. He learned the lesson, as did Khrushchev, that once these crises develop, they can't be controlled. Both Kennedy and Khrushchev felt that they had lost control in 1962. They realized that we had avoided nuclear war, not because of statesmanship and wisdom, but pure, blind, dumb luck. And that's why they wanted to defuse the crises. But then you get Johnson, and then you get the successors to Khrushchev, and they don't have that vision. So we need leaders with that kind of vision, but we also need the popular movements that are going to keep them honest. Obama said, if you want me to do the right thing, you're going to have to force me. And we weren't out in the streets, and we didn't force him, and he didn't do the right thing in many cases. But now we've mobilized, we've got to take advantage of that.
Thanks, Peter. Oliver, how about you? Can you give us one of your key positive takeaways from the documentary and book? It's not all doom and gloom. Like Peter said, there are some really positive things that we all do need to learn from and take forward.
Well, as Peter says, and I have to emphasize Roosevelt's leadership, the concept of a grand alliance, sticking with Russia. He wanted to live through that. It was just such bad luck and timing that he died in April. If he'd lasted till August, it would have been a different ballgame. Really important. But these things happen in history. It was bad luck. Trump's initiatives towards Ukraine, very important. They were cut off by the Democrats looking for vengeance. So you got to have some luck here, okay? And unfortunately for us, it ended with Kennedy, and he was murdered. As you know, I didn't go into it in this documentary, but you saw I made a feature film about who I think did it and why. But thank you. So, you know, it's gloves off. We're really playing dirty ball, and we play dirty ball all over the world, every intervention, and we keep doing it. And we're doing it to Russia constantly now it's on an everyday basis. It's really kind of scary to even mention the word Russian. So it's not looking good, you know. It's not looking good. After Kennedy, there was a brief, great moment with Carter there for 2 years until Brzezinski got his claws into him and turned him into an Atlanticist or whatever, another NATO freak. You know, NATO has expanded. You know, you should tell, I think people know, but NATO was expanded by Bill Clinton. It was against the spirit of the détente that Mr. Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev achieved. And that was a big thing. 3 major countries, Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, were put into NATO in '99 under Clinton when Yeltsin was still in office. That was a definite sign of something going wrong. And then in 2004, Mr. Bush expanded it with like 7 or 8 more countries, and Obama added 3 more. So we have 13, I believe it's 13 full countries have joined NATO. Why? NATO was a defensive bloc in World War II. It's had long died off, and many good people have said so, including George Kennan, who started the whole thing, who intellectually started the whole thing. So even Paul Nitze, I think, would agree that NATO did not have to exist after '91. And unfortunately, that's a huge sign to the Russians that we don't trust them, that they're bad guys. And then we must not forget that in 2001, very quietly, right after all the shock of what was going on in the world, in 2001, Mr. Bush one-sidedly rescinded the ABM treaty. This was enormous implications. This was the basis of the foundation of security between East and West. It was signed in 1972, I believe, between Brezhnev and Nixon. It's a very important thing for the Russians. Huge. ABMs are gone now, and we say to them, look, we have to deal with Iran. They might attack Europe, so we need ABMs in Europe, which is bullshit. The Russians know. ABMs can also be turned into offensive missiles, or in a question of hours. So you can't keep track of them sometimes. These ABMs are very tricky. Now, we're now putting them in Poland and Romania. ABMs are the basis of this post-war treaty. So the Russians have reacted accordingly and have obviously built bigger and bigger IBMs, huge ABMs that are capable, they say, of penetrating any American defense. They don't believe that this Star Wars concept that was born with Reagan is going to work. No. They don't believe the ABMs can stop. There's too many dummies you can put in the air. There's a lot of, and the Russians have developed a missile that I don't know exactly what they call it. It's the one that can spin and control. It can change direction. It can move of its own accord and avoid anything coming at it. It's a great name for it, the Russians have. But it's really dangerous, and they can get to New York in about 40 minutes, which may be a good idea with all the lunatics in New York, but at least Wall Street would get out of the way. No, I don't see anybody talking positive. It's all this crap. And I think when Trump was, weirdly enough, it's a crazy time. So you're asking what's the bright spot? It was Trump on that level, and there was hope, but not now, unless things calm down a bit. And the Russians are patient. They always understand the pressures. They understand very well the pressures in American politics and how ignorant they can be. So they're hoping for, let's quiet it down right now. That's where we have to go. But And let's get off this, let's look, I wish they would, the media would allow alternate media to take its place. I'd love to get my documentaries on mainstream TV because, frankly, I also co-produced a Ukraine documentary, which has been shown in Ukraine and Russia, and with great success, and on the the counter narrative to the Ukraine coup d'état, which is sponsored by the Americans, and is an illegal government in Ukraine. So these are things that people don't know. We have to get the information out somehow, and we have to have a counter narrative like Henry Wallace provided to some degree to Truman. It didn't work in the end, but at least he was talking differently to him rather than James Forrestal and all of and Burns and the people around Truman. So information is the best, or a new education system that we teach the kids a different way of thinking. Aggression is built into the American soul. I'm convinced of that through my own lifetime experience. It's been there. We didn't learn anything from Vietnam, and we kept going. Reagan made a big point about dismissing Vietnam. And Mr. George Bush, when he sent 500,000 troops to Arabia for Iraq I, which everybody applauds, was a disaster for this country. We got involved in the Middle East in a way we never should have. It was like another Vietnam, and we created a nightmare. He said the war of Vietnam is buried under the sands of Arabia. It was a great statement for him to say. But we have to acknowledge Vietnam. It was a great tragedy for us too. And it's just, I don't see where the education process works. I know Americans know better, but we seem to elect idiots.
But you're talking about Vietnam.
As it relates to today.
The latest Gallup poll shows that 51% of 18 to 29-year-olds in the United States say the Vietnam War was not a mistake, that the Vietnam War was worth fighting. So our educational challenge is pretty severe. According to the 2012 National Report Card, American high school seniors came in lowest, not in math and science, but in U.S. history. Only 12% of high school seniors were judged to be proficient in U.S. history. And so now we see that the majority of young people think the Vietnam War was worth fighting.
Amazing.
I wanted just to say, because you asked me about hope, I had great hope when Clinton got elected in '92. I thought he was going to be a good time, a humanist like Roosevelt. I really thought that, and I think he has those qualities. But he got boxed in right away by on the gay issue, which was kind of stupid, on the military. And he was scared because he didn't have service. He hadn't been in the military. So sometimes you think you should have military service because then you can fight back. That's what Kennedy had. He was only a captain, and he was dismissed as a punk by these generals. Eisenhower told him, go into Cuba. Kennedy stood up. Clinton backed down because he's not a military man. Same thing with Obama. He didn't have a backbone when it counted. Obama, as somebody once said, got the Nobel Peace Prize way too early because that puffed him up. A lot of people who worked with him said that something happened. He got that Peace Prize, and all of a sudden he was holier than thou and walking the corridor. So he lost it, and he made his deal, bringing on Hillary Clinton and all those types early. So, you hope. We voted for fucking Obama. For Christ's sake, what happened? Something happened between Election Day and Inauguration Day.
Well, it's interesting. When Obama was trying to figure out what to do about Afghanistan, he asked for options. And McChrystal and Petraeus and Hillary Clinton and Gates said we need to send 40,000 more troops in there. Obama wanted to send in 10,000 like Biden had suggested, but he caved in, right? Had Obama been president in 1962 instead of Kennedy, he would have listened to the generals, and he would have knocked out the missiles, and he would have invaded. And then, as we know now, we wouldn't be here. There would be probably not any world left after that point. So, you need to understand what Kennedy did. Right after the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy rebelled against the CIA, and he said, I'm going to shatter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it in the wind.
Yeah.
And he stood up and he fired the 3 heads of the CIA. And he said that he's going to tell his successor, the first thing, you don't trust the generals. He says that even on military matters, they don't know what they're talking about. He says, somebody comes in and talks to me about economics, I can stand up to them and challenge them. So, but you assume that the military and the intelligence people have some superior wisdom. And he says, but they don't. And Kennedy stood up to them. And maybe that's why he didn't survive his presidency.
In a way, it's ironic, because if you follow the history, to take on the CIA first 3 months of your presidency, you realize the Bay of Pigs was, he was told that he was shepherded into Bay of Pigs. Alan Dulles said, don't worry, kid, we got this covered. This is a sure bet. Eisenhower told him that too, I don't know. But he went with it. He obviously, right away, he figured it out, and he was furious because he wouldn't support the troops that went in and got killed or imprisoned. He wouldn't support them with U.S. air support, which is what Dulles figured he trapped Kennedy with. It didn't work out that way. As a result, Kennedy from the beginning was in trouble with these people. And that's the point, is that Trump happened the same thing. He said stuff that they did not believe in, at least some of them, most of them, the guys who had these things, and they turned on him very fast. Schumer of New York said to him, you did a stupid thing. You don't ever criticize intel agencies. Why not? They fucked up everything from the beginning. The CIA has been one of our worst enemies. It's been an internal enemy to us. They ran the war in Vietnam. There's no question about that. If you really examine all the documents, they were in charge of that war. They didn't know what the Soviet Union was falling apart. They had not a clue. I mean, because they threw out all the analysts at that point who had actually known something about the Soviet Union, because it didn't conform with Bill Casey's desires to destroy, to regime change the Soviet Union. So the CIA has missed out on WMD also, and as you know, what else have they? I mean, there's so much. I don't know where you can go into.
Well,
numerous
we can talk about Afghanistan. We can talk about
supporting the radicals in Afghanistan.
I mean, any piece of our history. That's what Oliver was saying, is that it's so ironic now that people have this great faith in the CIA and the intelligence community, when on our side, for years, that we never trusted them. We knew that they were the ones. For example, there's this discussion, the idea that the Russian intervention into our election is an act of war, right? And you turn on CNN and you see a panel of 4 people, and they're all saying it's an act of war. And you wonder, what planet these people come from? The United States has been overthrowing elections and intervening in elections since 1947. You know? And you know, we make lists of scores and scores and scores of elections that the United States has been involved in. There's never an election that we're not involved in, whether it's in one form or another, whether it's in Russia or in Venezuela or in Chile, or, I mean, every place there are elections, the U.S. has been involved. And so for us to say that this is an act of war is just to, again, have no sense of historical context. Now, I think Oliver and I might disagree a little bit about this, because I think that from Putin's standpoint, he had good reason to want to not see Clinton get elected. I didn't agree with him. I've been to Russia 4 times this year and did scores of Russian TV shows, and I was usually the only one saying, not the Russian colleagues, professors, analysts, they all were supporting Trump. And I was saying that if you have a choice between a madman and a warmonger, you have to choose the warmonger. So I was telling them that Clinton is actually going to be, in the long run, in their best interest, not Trump. But, but we have to have some historical perspective, which is what Oliver was saying. So what I was saying there is that it's possible that Putin did what he's being accused of there. And it would make sense from his standpoint that he's doing so. He would have motive to do that, given what Clinton represents. We don't have any evidence. As Oliver was saying, there's been no concrete evidence presented. And he and I both know a lot of people who are former top intelligence officials and are writing about this. And many of them don't buy this for a second. You know, what the official line is.
Including Julian Assange, who's been pretty good about his integrity since 2006. Most of his stories are 100% on. And he has been very clear about this, and he said it. It came from a non-state actor, and that non-state actor has appeared. He's spoken his piece. Craig Murray, not even mentioned by the mainstream media. Craig Murray, the ex-ambassador to Uzbekistan, said he received the material from a DNC insider in a park in Washington. Not an insider, a proxy for the insider. That insider, we don't know who he is. He may be dead or may have been killed, but we don't know that. But we do know that there was a lot of people in the DNC who were disturbed by the activities of Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Really disturbed by it as well. And 3 other people resigned besides her, the treasurer included. So that indicates something was very wrong and was going on in the DNC, including stopping Mr. Sanders. And these were foul deeds. Mr. Putin, I disagree with Peter, had no motive at all, because it was very clear to most people in that position, including probably Russian intelligence, that Clinton was going to win. So why would you endanger your relationship with the United States, poison it like that, and with the possibility that any evidence would be uncovered? Not that there was no evidence of it. They probably kept track of the election, yes, to know who they were going to be and who they were going to be having in office. But you might think this is naive. They do have a golden rule, and that's do not interfere in other people's elections. That's better for them in the long run. You have to deal in Russian diplomacy, and they do a good job of it with their very well-trained foreign staff. They wait for who's going to be in charge of the country, and they deal with that person, as they dealt with Reagan. That was a surprise. But they didn't try to influence Reagan. Reagan took advantage of the Iranian situation. I don't agree that the Russians have been involved in any way in trying to determine the outcome of any American election since going back to Cold War days. Really don't believe so, because they would get into such shit if they did.
Now, we might have some follow-up on that. We do want to open it up for just a few questions from the audience. We have microphones down here at the base of each aisle. So if you have a question for these two, now's your chance. Please keep your questions brief. And we're going to go for maybe about 15 minutes, hopefully. Let's start us off.
Thank you very much. I haven't read the book. I've seen the video repeatedly, and I was able to use it extensively in a class that I taught in Japan on American history. One of the things that is in that film about Pearl Harbor quotes Churchill as saying that in a meeting with FDR, that some incident needed to be created to get America in the war. That incident happened to be Pearl Harbor. There seems to be a lot of misinformation about Pearl Harbor. There's been a lot of books written. Robert Stinnes' book, Day of Deceit, I think is worth reading. But my question about all of this is, when do you think that we will get the information that is still being kept by the U.S. government about World War II that is not being shared through the Freedom of Information Act and is still being kept under national security? Will we ever get the information from the government, or is that a lost cause? Will we ever have the untold story told?
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, in our discussion of the U.S. being drawn into World War II, we show very clearly that Roosevelt wanted to get involved in World War II. Roosevelt told Churchill in Newfoundland, he says, we'll wage war, but we won't declare it. And they were trying to force an incident where the Germans would attack us. We thought that we'd go to war with Germany. We didn't expect to go to war with Japan. Now, a lot of people believe that Roosevelt knew we were going to get attacked at Pearl Harbor. That's a common belief. If you actually study the documents, we knew that we were going to get attacked, that Japan was building for an attack. We expected it to come in Malaysia or Burma. We didn't expect it to come at Pearl Harbor. We had been conducting various drills there, just in case we got attacked there, but we did not expect it to come there. And there's the telegrams, the documents are actually pretty clear on that. So, but Roosevelt welcomed the attack and was eager to get involved and declared war against Japan. Then Hitler declared war against us, and then the whole thing happened.
All right, just a reminder, let's keep our questions brief so that we can get to everyone in the queue.
Just the importance of the Dulles brothers and what they had to do with where we're at and have been all this time. Number two is the fact that knowing what you know, and you are surprised by what happens, how is it possible for us to even begin to think of what we could consider to be possible? So given those factors, we don't stand a chance in the sense that things are so controlled, and even when you were able to get behind the scenes and pull back the curtain, you're still surprised afterwards to find that what you thought would be isn't.
I hate to tell you that you're right. And I
sorry
would
to hear
feel
that.
victimized by the government and by the media. I would. And that's where Trump hit a nerve. Unfortunately, it was a nerve of a lot of people who are pissed off at the Washington elite, as you know, and they live often out, but they also, people in the cities who are Democrats and liberals feel that, or they should feel that. But the liberals have split, so, the young people don't understand the history yet. I think history, education, and above all, access to free media is important, and that's why I think the internet's one of the best things to prevent that, as well as the alternate press that comes off the internet. I mean, there is many good organizations. Many of them were named, ironically, by the State Department as being propaganda vehicles for Moscow. 200 of them, they found 200 of them, including Consortium News, for example, which is an excellent one. I believe they named Counterpunch, I'm not sure all. 200 fucking sites, most of them telling you the truth. So this is very interesting McCarthy time. Look, if you look in the paper, you can find it. You go to one of those sites and they will name the other ones, Alternet, Naked Capitalism. They have strange names, some of them, but they're worth following. Or look at RT, for Christ's sake. RT is the biggest propaganda vehicle of all, but it's very informative about what the U.S. is doing, because those are facts, and I think you can double check them. They say it's fake news. It's not fake news. The irony is, of course, the fake news, we get a lot of the fake news from our mainstream media. But we have to fight back with our minds. That's one way to fight back, and speaking to other people. And as to the Dulles brothers, may God curse them. They are rotting in the deepest part of hell. They are the worst. And there's a wonderful new book by David Talbot. You're going to have fights about it, but he goes back into the history of the Dulles brothers, and it's called Devil's Chessboard. I know David. Sometimes he goes a little too far, but it's hard to defend the Dulles brothers and their influence on the world. As you know, I think Alan Dulles is much smarter than people gave him credit for, and he certainly outfoxed Kennedy. And he got on the Warren Commission, too. That's pretty cool.
Last comment is the fact that if Wallace were president after Roosevelt, we have a different world to live in. And if people want the news, they can support Pacifica.
Yeah, Pacifica. Excellent. Amy Goodman.
Source. Thank you.
Amy Goodman's hung in there for years,
First of all, I want to thank both of you for a fantastic documentary which you created. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's informing people in ways they wouldn't get the information otherwise. But I hope you'll correct me. This is really awkward. I hope you'll correct me about what I'm about to say. But I hope you agree that Putin is no Khrushchev and Trump is no Kennedy. I didn't even know Jack Kennedy, but I can be sure that he is not Trump. So, how is it that you seem to have communicated to me anyway that you think that Trump is other than a madman and Putin is other than a vicious dictator? So if you'll correct me in that, I'd be very happy. But if you believe those things, please tell us why.
That's a long discussion. I don't know that we're going to go into all the details, but I think that if you examine all the actions from another angle, you'll find that Putin's rationalizations are very good, and he thinks into the future, 25, 50 years. And if you actually read the speeches, you're not going to find this extraordinary creation that you see. in the Western press. And you have to debate each one of these things, and that take time, you know. But I would certainly sit down with you in another format and do that on a radio or something like that. As to Trump, that's an easy categorization that you can throw at him, but it doesn't deal with the reality of the problem, which is he's a man, he's a human being, and he may have a bad temper, and he might be short-tempered and egotistic and all those things, but the office tends to season the man, and we hope for the best.
I guess Oliver and I disagree some on this, because I see Trump as hateful, bigoted. Trump represents to me everything that I despise in a human being. However, Oliver, it might be right that he's going to be delimited by the office. And we see, for example, that one of the things that scared me the most was his China policy. So he says he wants to do away with the one China policy. He wants a 45% tariff on imports from China. He wants to block access to the artificial islands of the South China Sea. I mean, this sounded like he was pushing for war, and then he backs down on that stuff. So, I mean, on the one hand, he says a lot of crazy things, but his actions on domestic policy, I think, are totally hateful. But on foreign policy, he hasn't been as crazy and dangerous and rash yet as I feared he was going to be. And in terms of Putin, Oliver spent time with Putin. Oliver knows him. I don't know Putin. I'm always asking my Russian colleagues, you know, so the allegations about Putin being a killer, right? And there's this whole list of people he supposedly had killed. So I asked my Russian colleagues, who are experts on this more than I am, and they deny it. They go person by person and say, well, this guy was likely knocked off by the Chechens or these people. So it's very hard to, until Oliver comes out with a documentary about Putin, it's going to be very hard to see Putin as a real person. I know that in a lot of ways, he does say a lot of things that I like about the world. And so I think that we have to not trust the media image. It's so lockstep now. All you see is Putin as a villain, Putin as a murderer, Putin as an aggressor, and I don't trust that either. So, but I'm somewhat more open-minded about Putin. But when it comes to Trump, I just am terrified by these fascistic tendencies that he has, and I hope we can constrain him so he doesn't act in that way.
Thank you. I do look forward to continuing.
All right. Yes, sir.
Mr. Stein, I just had a clarification question. You kind of made it seem that, you know, the media is really making it seem like an overreaction about Russia, but then at the same time, he asked you about hope, and you made it seem like the world was ending. So I'm not sure which is, you know, the truth, because Trump obviously doesn't seem to be very proficient in, you know, the nuclear triad or anything. So I was kind of, you know,
I just don't know what's the
what
contradiction.
is it? You know, is it the media portraying an overreaction, or is it, you know, not, and it's actually there's not a lot of hope and it's kind of bad?
I think it's more complex than that. I tried to give you hope. I mentioned some examples of it, and I tried to say that I'm in a dark spot. I agree with what Rick was saying earlier, but I'm trying to see the good side. And we all live in our heads, maybe we're pessimists, but in our hearts, we have to be an optimist to make it through. And you never know. We've been saved before. Look at what happened to this guy Arkhipov in a submarine. Look at Gorbachev in '86. That was a tremendous beacon of hope. There was a tremendous possibility in '86 and '91 particularly. Even when he fell apart, Gorbachev got off the stage. But there's possibilities, but there seems to be an aggressive side to our policy that was sort of DNA. You know, the way we were raised, football, military movies, war. We seem to have that infantile side that makes us very, very dangerous.
Thank you.
Yeah, during the election, well, I agree that Donald Trump is horrible, but I also think that Hillary Clinton is horrible. And I made the case that Hillary Clinton, well, nuclear war was much more likely under Clinton than Trump. So I have to agree with Oliver here. Trump has been much more of a critic of U.S. foreign policy than previous presidents. And I'm just wondering what happened to the American left? Why does one have to look to a figure such as Donald Trump to shake up U.S. foreign policy? How did we get here, and what happened to the anti-war movement?
It's not gone away. I think Peter mentioned the 60s as a time of protest, but also you remember when Reagan was at his most aggressive in 82, 83, Randall Forsberg, there was a tremendous movement against Reagan. There was, 1 million people in Central Park in 1980. Obama was there, and it was a SANE. It was called SANE. So these things arise spontaneously, and we mustn't overlook the. When Bush went into Iraq, if we took account across the world, most of the people in the world rejected that war. They thought it was a ridiculous war to go to. And it was in every country. It was a tremendous amount of protest, less media coverage, because again, I think at that point, the Republicans had moved the media into more of a corporate position. It was more corporate media. So a lot of that was dismissed. 1 million people in the center of Rome is not a joke. So, and when Bush went to London, I remember the imagery. He had to travel. They cleared the streets of downtown London so he could get to whatever it was, a Parliament building, and meet. In other words, they didn't want the people to contact Bush. So these things arise, and like the civil rights movement and the women's movement, they arise. And this is always a surprise, and it may happen again. It may start with anti-Trump, I don't know.
Would you agree that he's not a neocon or an American exceptionalist?
Well, if anything, he's avoided the neocons.
Yeah.
He really has, and he's made a point of it. Unfortunately, he's pointed, there's some people who will sneak in, like they snuck in. But if we got to keep these neocons out of the government, they're the most dangerous element we have. They have declared war on 7 countries in the Middle East. They've achieved half their goal. They would love Iraq to go, Syria to go, and that would be a linchpin of secular Shiite behavior. So this whole religious war is still driving a lot of this madness in the world. And Putin sees that. He understands, and he's done a lot of business, good business in the Middle East. He's actually trying to patch it up, the mess that we made. So I know you won't agree with me, the other fellow, but the truth is, you got to be a Putin. You got to have patience, and you got to try to see a way to mend sides. And it's possible by taking micro-step after micro-step. Syria is a fucking mess. Yeah. And if anything, if it can be held together, at least to have some sovereignty, it's very important.
Thank you.
So we just have a couple minutes left. Let's take 2 more questions. I'm sorry, friends who are not in the two-question
Let me just
limit.
add
Yeah.
one little thing to what Oliver said. This is a place where the United States and Russia have to work together. There's not going to be a solution in Syria unless the U.S. and Russia work together there. And Syria is a nightmare. It's one of the most complicated problems in foreign policy we've ever faced. There's so many different forces involved there. You've got Turkey, you've got Iran, you've got the United States. Everybody's involved there, and they all have different interests there. And there's 1,000 different groups there that are fighting. But Putin is playing potentially a positive role, and now there are meetings, and they're even meeting with the opposition. And the United States was not the one who initiated that. It was Russia who initiated that in meetings with the Syrian government, with Turkey, Iran. And they've just announced that they're going to be carrying out more meetings, UN-sponsored meetings.
And the so-called moderate opposition, too.
Yeah. So Putin, I think, wants to play a positive role. Oliver's mentioned before about the NATO expansion. And you have to understand that to understand how the Russians see the world. We wrote a piece called Through Russian Eyes, in which we traced the history from the Russian Revolution up to the present, the way the world looks to the Russians, as opposed to the way the world looks to the Americans. And it's completely different. We're talking about nuclear issues. In 2006, Lieber and Press published an article in Foreign Affairs magazine, the Council of Foreign Relations magazine, saying that if the United States launched the first strike against Russia and China, the first nuclear strike, neither country could even respond to us. And that freaked people out in Moscow and in Beijing. And their heads were exploding when this came out, and they realized that a lot of that was true. What we've seen in the past decade is that Russia and China have modernized not only their nuclear forces, but their entire military. And so now they pose a much different kind of threat. But we have to begin to appreciate the world the way it looks to them, and not just the way it looks to the Americans and American hegemons and American empire, and see the world as a much more complex. It's becoming a different world now. And the U.S. is not going to be able to dictate and ride roughshod over the world the way we did for 70 years.
Last one?
Mr. Stone, as you mentioned before, the government, our United States government, was involved in the overthrow of a democratically elected government in Ukraine and Viktor Yanukovych, and there was no media coverage on the American involvement in that.
That's correct.
And as of last year, Putin said that our world is being pushed to an irreversible point. There was no media coverage on that either.
That's right.
And basically, what my question is now the only thing that I see on the media are baseless allegations on Trump that he is a Putin stooge.
Yeah.
And as a person that's been in the media, I would just like you to explain, why does the media keep on pouring gas on the fire that is the tensions between United States and Russia?
It's an excellent question, and I am not sure I'm an expert enough to tell you, but talking to some people I know, it seems to me that the neoconservatives, I go back to that, the neoconservatives have extended their web and their influence. They're a small group, but they've been very effective. And when Hillary Clinton joined them, in a sense, she never would admit it, and the same objectives, they supported her in this last election. You have to understand, these are the people that really see America as a hegemon, it's important for them, for America to run the world, to establish their control. And they have to be very tough about it, and that includes regime change in Iran, China, and Russia. They're serious business for them. It's not a joke. They think about this all day. They sit there there's a couple of think tanks that they're very close with. This is serious for them. And they go on fighting, and they control, for some reason, the editorial page at the Washington Post, and perhaps they control some of the news too, because it's been shoddily reported. That includes the Times. Time magazine, I don't know where they are, but they're definitely on that side of the equation. And CNN, and I don't know that I think CNN takes its marching orders, in a sense, its sense of what's going on from these newspapers. So they are important in an old-fashioned way. And I don't think a lot of people actually read them. But they control. The New York Times has changed utterly in my lifetime. They've always been for war. They were for Vietnam. They were for Iraq I, Iraq II. They actually were for these papers. And they've been for every war we've been in. We've been in several. I haven't seen, and then the moderation comes in once we get into the mess, but it's too late. So this whole thing is weird in my lifetime. I think the neoconservative element has gotten control of their editorial board, because it's insane to read what they write. It's so one-sided. No paper that is diplomatic or would call a president of another country a thug, murderer, and so forth without proof. So that's what's going on now. We've entered into this, what Henry Kissinger called demonization of a man is not a foreign policy. So we don't have a foreign policy. We're not thinking in terms of balance of power. Perhaps this is because maybe you could argue they're so afraid of this thing falling apart, that the U.S. dream is falling apart. Why? Because China is moving in its direction. As Peter said, they built up their armaments. We spend $600 billion a year on defense, 600. Russia spent $66 billion last year. That's 1 to 10. I mean, you have to understand that they can't keep up with us, nor do they intend to, but they can build cruder weapons. And they don't care, because they have to defend themselves. So it's going to be a cruder nuclear device than our device. We think smart nukes would make a difference. We are still going for this old Eisenhower problem, which is a PSYOP program. We want first strike ability. That's what's shocking to me. Why would we want first strike ability? What does it mean? There is no successful first strike. I believe Mr. Putin when he says they are ready for it. They are ready for it. They're ready for war. It's in their DNA. Think about World War II. They don't forget. If you go to Russia, you sense it. In America, you don't sense that we've ever been in a war, ever. There's no sense of shame. We worship the military. We march it into football stadiums, baseball stadiums. We advertise in commercials on the air. We are number one. This is a sickness, a military sickness that we have. Anybody who's been in war, as I have, would have some respect for the enemy, some respect for the dead, and some respect for what's happened. There's no good guy. There's no winner like that. That's very American. Anyway, you asked how they got in. I don't know. I'm sorry. I got off the track. You see, this is a difference. This is a difference between a Putin and me, because he would not get emotional about this. But this is a true problem. And I don't know what's going on in America, except this is very serious. They control the debate. Why? I wish Rand Paul could get out there, but his voice is too weak. We need some kind of strong leadership. I wish, what's his name, Sanders had spoken up on foreign policy. He never did. Tulsi Gabbard has said the right things, but she's a representative, a very young one. So, how do you get any kind of power? The best journalists have been blacklisted in a way. I mean, Seymour Hersh is kind of on the margins, and the idiots like David, Ignatius speaks for the nation, like George Will used to speak for the nation. How did this happen?
Well, this is not something new, right? If we look at the history of the media in the United States, you look at it throughout the Cold War, you look at it going way back before that, the media has always been controlled by conservative voices and big money interests, and they've got a certain
1980s, remember they'd make that big move. It's in our documentary.
Yeah, but we trace it back earlier. The New York Times has always played that role of giving a certain kind of information that justifies U.S. foreign policy. So this is not something new. What we see now, in part, is they're trying to explain how Clinton lost. And so they're trying to blame it on Putin and the Russians. Whether or not they were involved in it, that's not why Clinton lost. Comey had much more influence than that. The real reason Clinton lost was she was a terrible candidate. How can you lose to a man whose approval ratings were in the 30%, even at the height of that campaign? And even now, his approval ratings are 35%, whereas Obama's were in the 60s. Everybody else was in the high 50s or 60s or more. So I think that Trump has a short leash right now, and that he is very vulnerable, and that we can organize, that if he keeps on dropping his popularity, the Republicans are going to look to jettison him. That if we create that environment, and you look what's happening at these town hall meetings, that's wonderful. People have to continue that.
Except
and the
you
meetings,
get Pence. Except you'll get Pence.
We'll get Pence, yeah. And then we're going to have to organize against Pence, and we have to organize against Ryan, and then we've got to win the midterm elections. And there are quite a few of them here in California that are going to flip in the 2018 election. And we've got to get a really progressive candidate for president in 2020.
No, you're dreaming. I mean, you're dreaming. I think the McCain faction is he's another neocon. He's nuts. I mean, crazy, really crazy. Even Trump said, McCain and Graham, those two, that team, they're looking for World War III.
Yeah.
And Trump, unfortunately, I don't understand that he said we're going to build up our military. No budget has been set. It's coming in March. But McCain has asked for $400 billion more. He wants to take the 600 up to $1 trillion, and that's just the known budget. Forget the secret and the hidden numbers. $1 trillion. Russia, $66 billion. China has upped, as Peter said, up to $270 billion. You know what the third largest country in the world in terms of military spending is? Saudi Arabia. About 100 or 85, 87. Russia's fourth. I mean, what are we scared of? What are we so scared of?
Well, actually, I'll disagree a little bit with Oliver on that. we're scared because the US and Russia have close to 1,000 nuclear weapons pointed at each other on hair trigger alert. And so that is scary because those weapons have to be used almost instantaneously in the first 15 minutes of a conflict. So we haven't really talked about nuclear winter. Let me just mention that this is another thing that scares the crap out of me. That we know that the discussion of nuclear winter back in the 1980s and the assessment of that was actually underestimated. The latest studies show that a limited nuclear war between India and Pakistan, in which 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons were used, would create enough smoke in the atmosphere, block the sun's rays, that up to 2 billion people would die over the next decade. That's India and Pakistan, 100 nuclear weapons. There are now 15,000 nuclear weapons in the world, between 8 and 80 times as big as the Hiroshima bomb, and 1,000 of them are on hair trigger alert pointed at each other between the United States and Russia. So a large-scale nuclear war would not only would end all life on the planet, very likely, certainly all human life on the planet. So this is a real threat. So we have to cut nuclear weapons between the U.S. and Russia. So we've got, as Rick said, 93% between the two of us, and we've got to cut those back below the threshold for nuclear winter, so we at least have some hope for a future and future generations.
All right. I've been given the signal to cut it off. I'm so sorry, you guys. It's been a long evening already, and we've got to cut it off there. Thank you all so much. And our two special guests, Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick. Thank you so much.